Hi everyone, Dushyant here. Welcome to my bio channel. So, I'm going to teach you today the first lesson from class 11, the living world. The first topic, the characteristics of life. So, before going to that, let's have an intro of biology and life. See children, you have ever thought how this life exists on the earth? So, life is a very complicated process of chemical substances, chemical reactions among the substances. That's according to a chemistry teacher. So, maybe according to a physics teacher, it may be because of the waves which are present around us, just and maybe because of some beautiful relations which exist between us, like a symphony, according to the literature student. So, whatever it is, biology student defines life not with a single character, with the many characters he is going to define the life. So, what is biology? Biology, bios means life, logos means discourse or study. So, study of life is nothing but biology, right? So, today we are going to discuss what is life first. So, unique complex organization of molecules that express through chemical reactions can be called as life, right? Here you can see bacteria, a plant, a virus and a mushroom, many things you can see, organisms. So, bacteria is a unicellular prokaryotic organism. So, you might have learned from your earlier classes that prokaryotes do not have a proper nucleus. Plants, mushrooms, these are like of different organisms, and viruses cannot be defined as a true living beings. Sometimes they are considered as a connecting link between living and non-living beings. So, what all these things, particularly the living beings which you consider, have in common? So, the living beings in common, what they have, we are going to discuss today. Those are the characteristics of a life. So, the first one is growth and respiration, reproduction. Second one is metabolism. Third one is responsiveness or consciousness. Fourth one is cellular structure. Fifth one is homeostasis. Sixth one is adaptation. Seventh one is variations. Eighth one is healing and repair. Ninth one is disposal of wastes. 10th one is movements. 11th one is lifespan. So, what are the characters which I considered? I just going to describe all of them by giving some proper explanations. So, many people may have different opinions about life. So, I am presenting my opinions about life which are scientific, which I got from your syllabus. So, listen carefully. First, we are going to see what is growth and reproduction. Okay children, let's get back to our concept, growth and reproduction. So, what do you mean by growth? Growth is actually something increasing in the size of an individual, both in mass and length. So, increase in the size of the mass of an individual and increase in the height of an individual also. So, both of them will come under growth, in fact. So, you are not the same person 2 years back, you are not the same of height 5 years compared to 5 years back. So, now you have grown up, in future you will grow up. In fact, each and every organism grows till some extent. So, trees grow lifetime. If you take animals, growth is limited actually. So, trees and plants exhibit unlimited growth and lifetime growth, whereas if you take animals, they don't have unlimited growth. We have growth up to some extent actually. So, now if you see, growth can be of two types. One is accretion, second one is intussusception. Okay, so let me ask you a simple question. So, if increasing in mass is growth, say for example, I have kept a heap of sand. This is sand. I have added more sand to this. So, if I add more sand to this, is it going to grow actually? Can it be called as growth? Of course you can call it as growth. And if you take in the stock market, you invested some money, so that money from year to year it started growing, and from day to day it started growing. For example, somehow it grew actually, so it will grow up actually, it will grow up. So if it is growing up, can it be called as growth? Yes, of course. A company maintains lot of employees and an employee is doing well, and because of that company's growth is very good, for example. So can you call it as growth? What's the difference among the growths of all these things? If you take this growth in the company or growth in the share market, all these are commercial things which are which cannot be seen with our eyes actually. That growth is totally different, which is not of biological origin. So biologically if you take growth, that is different. And if you see the growth of the sand, if you are adding more and more sand, the heap of the sand will grow. This is the heap of the sand which grows actually in size. So that is different actually. So if you see the mountains here there are a lot of mountains are there, and these mountains, sun is good, right? See, he is laughing, smiling. Okay, so these mountains usually they emerge from the soil, from the earth actually. The Himalayas which you are seeing today, which are the world's largest mountain range, Everest is one among them. In fact, Everest is the tallest mountain if you see. Can you believe that these Himalayas are small hills some millions of years? So now they became very tall since they emerged from the earth actually, since they emerged from the earth. So mountains usually emerge from the earth, and they go up actually. So what's the difference between the growth of these human beings or other animals, plants or living beings, and the growth of these things? Can you just say a difference? So the growth which you see in case of non-living things like mountains or a heap of sand is because of accretion. So what do you mean by accretion? Accretion is something from outside it gets accumulated. Accessory means to accumulate. So to accumulate something from outside can be called as accretion, you call it as. So whereas if you take in living beings, it is not like that. Intussusception means, intus means from within, susception means the growth happens from within, can be called as intussusception. In living beings, intussusception happens. So this is the growth between living and non-living beings. And all living beings will not grow. It's not mandatory for all the living beings. Some of the living beings may grow, may not grow, of course. So because of that reason, growth cannot be considered as a defining property of the living beings. The next one is reproduction. So re means again, production means producing the young ones of the same type can be called as reproduction. So this reproduction is of two types, asexual and sexual. If a rose plant produces a rose plant, a new rose plant, that is reproduction. If a human produces a human baby, that's called as reproduction. And if a amoeba produces two daughter amoebae, then that is known as reproduction. If euglena produces two daughter euglena, then that is reproduction. If from the rice seeds, if you are able to produce rice plants, the seeds which are produced is due to reproduction. So this reproduction can be of two types, asexual and sexual. In asexual reproduction, no physical union happens, no physical union or no gametes will unite. So you cannot find any gametes. Here you can find sperm and egg cell. So in sexual reproduction you can find sperm and egg cell. So whereas in asexual reproduction you can't find anything like that. So because of that reason, only one parent is there in asexual reproduction, there are two parents there in sexual reproduction. And one more thing, Here in asexual reproduction you can't have any variations. In sexual reproduction you will have variations, changes, that is because of union of sperm and egg cells. Half of the characters you get from father, half of the characters you get from mother. So reproduction is also one of the other features of living beings, but sometimes reproduction may not give rise to the fertile young ones. So reproduction is possible between only organisms of the same species, organisms of the same species. So organisms of the same species interbreed among themselves to produce the young ones. The word you have to see is interbreed. Interbreeding happens between the individuals of the same species. Same species, you have to note it down, but rarely it fails. In fact, in some of the plants nearly related species will give rise to the fertile offspring, and in some animals particularly, if you take in animals it is not common of course. So in animals, if you take a donkey and a horse give rise to a mule. Mule is infertile, where it is not following the rule of reproduction, where these two are different species. And a tiger and lion, not in the wild, under captivity, they may have union to give rise to liger. So you might have seen the movie recently, Vijay Devarkonda movie. Liger is fertile of course, but still it is not following the rules of reproduction. So reproduction is not considered as a defining property of the living beings. So defining property is something which is definitely followed by the living beings. It's not defining property is something which is not followed by some of the living beings, which you cannot see in some of the living beings. Okay, let's go to the next character. So now the next one is metabolism. In metabolism, metabol means to change. The changes which happen inside our body can be called as metabolism. Not all the changes are metabolism, but the physiological reactions which happen inside our body, like respiratory reactions or digestive reactions, or if you take the reactions which are related to excretion, many physiological activities are there now, all of them come under metabolism. So these metabolic reactions can be divided into two types. One is anabolism, second one is catabolism. So what do you mean by anabolism? Anabolism is nothing but a constructive reaction. The reaction which is constructive in nature. Sir, what is constructive, sir? Or is our body going to use some cement, rock, some kind of thing to build a building, or what, you may ask me. So not that, kids. C6H12O6, glucose is there, for example. More glucose molecules will join. Say for example, first, because of the photosynthesis, a plant prepares 6 CO2 molecules and 12 H2O molecules combined together to form C6H12O6, and O2 is liberated and H2O is also liberated as byproducts, and mainly glucose is formed. And this is a constructive reaction, of course, and this glucose, if it is not used by the plant body, then it tries to store the excess glucose in the form of starch. That is, many glucose molecules combine together to form starch, C6H12O5 whole N. N is many thousands of molecules of a glucose. So these both can be considered as anabolic reactions. The common example which you know for anabolism is 6CO2 12H2O gives rise to C6H12O6 plus 6O2 plus 6H2O. But C6H12O6 in turn many molecules will get stored, that is also, it will convert into starch, that is also a constructive reaction. And now catabolism, if you take, it is a destructive reaction. So here Glucose in the presence of oxygen, we call it as aerobic respiration. It breaks down to CO2 and H2O, and 38 ATP of energy is given. So you know well about respiration. Respiration, we take in oxygen and we release carbon dioxide. So along with that some energy is released. What exactly happens during respiration? Only taking in oxygen and only releasing out carbon dioxide. Is it so? Apart from that, this glucose is going to break down in the presence of oxygen. It's not only taking oxygen and releasing CO2, it's a breakdown of the glucose in the presence of oxygen. So that is respiration is. So that is a catabolic reaction. Here the breaking down of glucose molecule is happening. The glucose molecule is breaking down to CO2 and H2O, and it is giving rise to 38 ATP. So this is what we call it as catabolism, you call it as. So this is metabolism. So metabolism is a defining property of living beings. So why do you call it metabolism as a defining property? Because metabolism is exhibited by all living beings. Sir, do the reactions not happen outside the living body? Yes, of course, but those reactions which happen inside our body and the reactions which happen outside the body are different. I mean, same reactions may happen, but we call them as cell-free reactions. The reactions which do not happen inside the cell or cell-free reactions. Say for example, you have taken a test tube. In the test tube you have taken some glucose. To that you added some saliva. Saliva has an enzyme named salivary amylase. So it's not glucose, actually starch you have taken for example. So now this salivary amylase converts that starch into glucose, or some maltose it converts into, first it converts into maltose, then it converts into glucose. So starch is a bigger molecule. So starch has many glucose molecules. All these glucose molecules will have bonds. So glucose, 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 just like this. Thousands of glucose molecules join together to form starch. Now those molecules are broken down. So it is a catabolic reaction only, but it is not happening inside the human body. So same reaction it may be, but you can't just compare it with the living reaction. It is a cell-free reaction. So tissue culture also, you might have heard about tissue culture. So tissue culture, test tube babies. So these are also the best example of cell-free reactions. Of course, test tube baby or tissue culture are not cell-free reactions, but at least they are performed in laboratory. So those are laboratory reactions, so which are giving rise to life actually. Reactions need not happen compulsorily in the living beings, but in living beings also these reactions will happen. All living beings, they are going to happen. So that's why it is a defining property. Even though it may happen outside the body also, it does not matter, but what you have to consider for defining property is whether it is happening in all living beings or not. So whereas in case of reproduction it is not like that, some deviations are there, so perfectly it is not happening. So that's why it is a non-defining character of living beings, we call it as. But metabolism is not like that. It is not a non-defining property, it is a defining property, because all living beings it is going to happen. And the next one is responsiveness. So say for example, you and your friends plan to go to some movie, for example. Your friend did not come to movie on time, for example. So he hasn't come to movie on time, for example. Then how will you respond? So why didn't you come to movie? You will ask him actually. It makes you something like you will be little angry. Say for example, if you are walking on a sun, under sun, so you feel it's hot actually. So if you're walking in rain, you feel that. So that can be called as responsiveness. I mean, you will respond in a different way. That is because of consciousness. Consciousness means what is happening in your surrounding, knowing what is happening in your surrounding. And say for example, you got good marks, you will feel very happy. Say for example, your teacher gave you compliment, you will feel happy. Your teacher scolded you, of course we can't scold you nowadays, the rules are like that, we know very well. Can we really scold you nowadays? That's against law, of course. And if you are serious, for example, for a moment, you could not get marks up to your level, you are not performing. I am serious on some student, for example. So then you may feel sad about yourself, or you may feel sad about the teacher. So that sadness will come for you. So that is one sort of response. Responses come out of consciousness. You know what is happening. CONSCIOUSNESS, consciousness. So you know what's happening in your surroundings. And human beings have a special gift, that is a self-consciousness, where other organisms do not have. We know about ourselves. This is me. We human beings only have names. Other living beings do not have names. And human beings are very just self-aware of ourselves compared to the other organisms. So that is what we call it as self-consciousness, you call it as. And not only the human beings, every living being, from bacteria till the big elephant. So bacteria is a unicellular organism, a microbe. So it also responds to the viruses. Say for example, a small virus is approaching this bacteria. So this bacteria will recognize it by the chemicals which are released from the virus. So usually bacteriophages are the viruses which hunt bacteria, just like a tiger hunts a deer. In the same way, bacteriophages hunt bacteria, but here bacteriophages viruses are very small, bacteria are very big actually. That's the surprising thing. But these bacteria try to get away from the virus by running away, actually by moving away from that. They may not run, but by moving away. So that is one sort of response actually. So all living beings have got some response. So human beings are self-consciousness. And responsiveness is unique to living beings. It is a defining property of the living beings. So it is a defining property of living beings. Okay. And our next one is cellular structure. So what do you mean by cellular structure? Cellular structure means all living beings are made up of cells. You know, this is a plant cell and this is an animal cell. Plant cell and animal cell, these are the two types of cells. So plant cell is different from animal cell, of course, and bacterial cell is different from both plant cell and animal cells. Whatever it is, at the end of the day, cell is the basic unit of life. Cell is the basic unit of life, basic structural and functional unit of life. So cellular structure is exhibited by all living beings without any exception. That's why this is also a defining property. This is also a defining property. Cells combine together to form tissues, tissues combine together to form organs, organs combine together to form organ systems combine together to form an organism, right? So this is about cellular structure. So our next concept is adaptations. So what do you mean by adaptations? So adaptations is a term which is made up of two other words. Ad means towards, ad means towards. Apt means make suitable. So make suitable towards something can be called as adaptations. So your body is there, for example, you're walking in sunlight. So what happens? Your body will respond by sweating, right? And if you're walking in winter on the road without any proper woolen coat, for example, you will shiver actually. Why do you shiver? You have any idea that why do you shiver? Shivering is a kind of response by your body which tries to increase the body temperature. So shivering is a kind of response where it creates some sort of a movement in your body, on your skin actually, by shivering actually, and in that way your body tries to create some temperature rise. Your body tries to create some temperature rise actually. So right, so the temperature rise will a kind of a adaptation it is. So adaptations, these are all adaptations. Say for example, a eagle is there. Eagle tries to hunt some small birds on the land actually, and this eagle, when it is hunting down, it needs a stronger claws and good vision. You are well aware of the fact that eagle can watch anything on the earth with its unique vision actually. Even from the top, when it is flying in the sky, it can watch. That's an adaptation where many birds will not have. Eagle like birds only will have. And next, if you take, eagles have claws, and these claws are helpful for holding something and killing it. Beak also, of course, if you take the beak which is present in the eagle, which is suitable for killing a small bird and small creatures, it is useful for, it is carnivorous in nature. Whereas a parrot usually eats fruits, its beak is not suitable for killing some other organism. Of course, it may be sharp, but that is particularly useful for just taking the birds actually, sorry, not birds, taking the fruits. So eating the fruits. Or if you take a sparrow, sparrow's beak is useful for crushing the grains. These are all adaptations. In fact, these are all long-term adaptations. And there are some short-term adaptations also. These short-term adaptations can be considered as migrations. So migrations are short-term adaptations. From one place to another place, birds migrate to save themselves from the harsh environmental conditions. Say for example, birds from Siberia migrate to India. There are some birds are there which migrate from Siberia. Siberia is an area in America which is near to North Pole. Temperatures are very low actually, and they migrate from Siberia to India during the winter. Winter is more worst for them. For the temperatures in winter we are shivering, but imagine the birds which live under minus 20, 30, minus 20, minus 20, minus 30, minus 40 degrees centigrade. They literally can't survive that atmosphere. That's why they come to India, where this winter itself is causing you shiver, but in this winter these birds will enjoy because they already got adapted to that severe winter. 10 degrees centigrade, 5 degrees centigrade, 0 degrees centigrade is also okay for them, but minus 20, minus 30 is literally not okay for them. So just to escape from that environment, they come to India, they lay the eggs, and along with their small bird eyes, along with their small birds, they go back to Siberia. That's one kind of temporary adaptation. It is short term adaptation, you call it as. Adaptations are also one of the other characters of living beings, where all living beings don't show it. So the next one is healing and repair. Healing and repair. See, whenever you fall down, if a wound happens to you, it will heal. Living organisms can repair themselves. And the next one, variations. Variations means differences. These differences will happen from one generation to another generation. So this is the most common thing among organisms. So variations may happen, may not happen. There is some degree of variations are there. In some organisms many variations may happen. In some organisms lesser variations may happen. So variations also one of the other feature. So and our next one is homeostasis. Homeos means same or alike. Stasis means standing, which means standing alike. What do you mean by standing alike? In the prayer, just like you stand, all the kids just like stand. Is it so? So standing alike means, indirectly it means maintaining the same sort of conditions inside your body. So maintaining the same type of internal environment, not as it is, maybe trying its level best to maintain the same conditions. So what do you mean by that? So let me explain with one example. Some of the organisms are cold blooded organisms, where their body temperature will change with the surrounding environment. It tries to keep the temperature stable, but it cannot. So little variations do happen, some variations do happen actually. In fishes it happens usually. Warm blooded means their blood will not change, their temperature will not change. In case of human beings, the temperature is 37 degrees centigrade, that will not change. Blood pressure, our blood pressure is 120/80. In earlier classes you might have studied actually. So whenever the heart is contracting, it is 120 mm of Hg, 120 mm of Hg. Hg means mercury. The pressure is calculated in mm of Hg, 120 mm of Hg, and whenever it is relaxing, the pressure which is there 80 mm of Hg. We call it as 120/80. 120 is contraction, 80 is relaxation. While contraction, more pressure will be there, so that's why it is 120. While relaxation, it is less pressure, so 80 mm of Hg it is. So same sort of condition, same type of internal environment if you are trying to maintain, then that is homeostasis. Homeostasis is a unique living character of a living beings. It is a defining property in fact, where this homeostasis may not be found in other non-living beings. Of course it is not found at all. And next one is a lifespan. All living beings have a lifespan. So say for example, human beings have in India have some 60 to 70 years lifespan on an average. In America there is some lifespan of average around 70 to 75, something like that. In Japan like countries, it is some 100, more people will live more up to some 100 years. You know about Japanese very well. They have a disciplined lifestyle, and they wrote one book also regarding this, Ikigai. Then they name it as, in internet it is available. How Japanese are living for a long time, you will understand it by this kind of books actually. So I personally like that book very much. So lifespan is particularly for humans, it is around 70 to 100, maybe 60 to 100, most probably it is 70 to 100. On an average it comes around 70, that's it. And in case of a bacteria, if you take, it is 20 minutes, just 20 minutes. And in case of some other creature, it may be different. And if you take some other creature, like say for example a dog, if you take 10 to 15 years it is. So a tortoise, if you take, some tortoises live even up to 300 to 400 years. And some peepal trees, if you take 3000, 2000 years also they live. That's why the trees which you see in your area, particularly this peepal and banyan like trees, they are very, very old actually. They are very, very old in fact. Thousands of years they live for in fact. So the trees, so there are so many trees in the world, species in the world which live for very long time. So living beings have a lifespan actually. So that is one of the characteristic feature of living beings. And movements. So movements do happen in the living beings. Say for example, human beings, we are moving from one place to another place. Plants do not move from one place to another place, but inside the plants, water is moving up and down. Nutrients which are produced in the leaves of the plant, they are moving up and down, and these are called as molecular movements, you call them as. Glucose is a molecule. So stem of a plant needs some energy. So for that, glucose need to move to the stem, or the glucose need to be stored in the roots. Say for example, a sweet potato is there. So sweet potato has starch. How does that starch came there? How does that starch is present there? Actually the glucose is being prepared in the leaves, and it is converted into the starch in the leaves itself. In fact, in the leaves also some starch is present. How does that excess starch, which is not useful for the plant, it went down and reached the root? By movement only. So somehow movements do exist in the plants also, even though they are not moving from one place to another place. So movements are very, very important for living beings, where you can't find these movements in other organisms. A systematic movement you can't find. Say for example, you heated a pan. So inside the pan, the molecules will start moving hardly, they'll move like this, and if you increase the temperature more and more, because of these molecular movements, more and more heat and energy is liberated. Because of that, when you touch it, it is very hot actually. So even though they are moving also, these movements are not systematic, not continuous. If you are heating only, that movement happens. Or water is there, water is moving na sir. So water will move, man, correct only, but if you keep it in a container without any disturbance, it will not move. So water moves according to the gravity, that's it. So the movements in the human beings are as per the requirement, and they are independent actually. So that's why movements are exhibited by living beings are systematic. And death, so death is exhibited by living beings only, non-living beings do not have death. So death is permanent cessation of all activities which happen inside our body. So sometimes the organisms do not perform anything inside. For example, coma is there. Coma cannot be considered as death actually. Even though the person is not responding, inside he will be alive only. If you are supplying proper nutrients through IV, then the person will live actually, no issues will be there. So coma may be an exception for death, but death is there for all living beings. Okay, these are the characteristics of the living beings. And lifespan, movements, death, and in our list, one more character is there, disposal of wastes. We human beings can separate the wastes from our body, the things which are toxic to us, and we can excrete them outside in the form of urine, and in the form of fecal matter also, in the form of sweat, and CO2 which is going out during the respiration. Oxygen we take in, CO2 we leave it out. This CO2, all these are waste materials. We can separate the waste and we can throw them outside. So these are all the characteristics of living beings. Hope you enjoyed my class. Further, I will show much more improvement in my classes. And if you have any doubts, you can comment. Thank you so much.